Welcome to HECTV's live interactive program that's part of St. Louis.
The whole production is pulled together.
There's going to be a steel bridge.
On the American classic novel,
The car that put America on wheels.
Welcome to HECTV Live. Good morning, everybody. I'm Tim Gore, your host for HECTV Live, and I'm very happy to welcome you to the Contemporary Art Museum here in St. Louis, in the Grandale Center Entertainment District of St. Louis, Missouri, where today we're going to have the chance to explore the making of contemporary art. In late April and throughout the summer, there'll be an exhibition here at the Contemporary Museum called the Great Rivers Biennial Exhibition, where 3 artists will have work displayed that they have been commissioned to produce specifically for this space. Today, you're going to have the opportunity to meet those 3 artists, find out about what inspires them, why they work the way they do, and the kinds of pieces they plan to create for the exhibition. You'll have a chance to see some video of their studios, to see their work in progress, and to ask them your questions. You're also going to meet museum educator Tuan Nguyen, and we're going to talk a little bit about what is contemporary art and what is the mission of the Contemporary Art Museum. As always, we're interested in you interacting with today's program. We've got interactive schools joining us from Texas, Kentucky, and Ohio this morning. We're looking forward to their face-to-face questions. And of course, if you're watching on the web or on TV, then we want your email questions. You can email them to us at live@hectv.org. That's live@hectv.org. I'll be coming to our interactive video conference schools in just a moment to let you guys say hi and to make sure everybody's connected. But first, I want to introduce Tuan Nguyen, who's a museum educator here from the Contemporary Museum. Tuan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks for being here and letting us be in your space, so to speak.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what is the Contemporary Art Museum. How long has it been here, and what's your basic mission?
Well, the Contemporary Art Museum has started quite a long time ago, but in this specific location, we started in 2003. And our mission basically is to bring contemporary art to the general public here and bring basically the most cutting-edge thoughts and ideas to visitors.
Well, let's talk about contemporary art. I'll ask the big question. So, what is contemporary art?
Well, that is a tough question, but simply put, I think contemporary art is basically art that's being made today by artists who are living now.
So contemporary art could run the gamut in terms of media. It could be something that's painting, it could be something that's sculptural, it could be something that's video, it could be any number of media?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, it could be. Basically, artists, they work to reflect our times and the issues of the times. And a lot of contemporary artists, as with most artists throughout time, have worked to kind of push the boundaries of that technology. So, for example, a lot of contemporary artists today are using video, using sound, using the internet, a lot of these different things. And if you want to relate that to things in the past, artists like Jan van Eyck, who invented oil painting, he invented something to create what he needed to do for that time. So contemporary artists have always been pushing the boundaries of what's been available.
So when we think of contemporary art, we think of it as Renaissance art now, but when they are producing it, it would have been contemporary art.
Exactly. So if you want to think about it, all art at some point was contemporary art.
And so then as we go through time, historically, we have modernism, or we have surrealism, or we have neoclassicism, or we have romanticism, we have the movements because we have the advantage of looking back in time there.
Exactly. We have, hindsight is 20/20, as they always say, so we have that privilege. Right now, since things are happening at the moment, we don't have that critical distance just yet, but so that's why I think sometimes there's a lot of confusion around contemporary art.
And the space we're in, you don't have a collection of your own that you show consistently in this space. It's almost entirely traveling exhibitions or exhibitions designed for this space, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. Since we're traditionally, we're not a collecting museum, we're a non-collecting museum, so everything that is in the space has been made or commissioned for the space. And it's something where a lot of times the museum, the exhibitions manager will create things just for the space, and artists will come in and do site-specific works for the space.
And that's what's happening here, obviously, with the Great Rivers Biennial Exhibition. This is the 4th time you've done it.
Yes.
Give the students an idea and the audience an idea about what is the concept here and where do these artists come from? How do you pick them?
Okay, well, every 2 years we have a open call for St. Louis area or greater Midwest area artists to come in and submit their work, and we have 3 independent jurors. They can be curators or directors of other museums from around the country, and they come in and for a week they look at the application materials, and they're just sequestered in this room and they come out and they make a decision based upon what they feel is I guess, right for the show and what's relevant in contemporary art.
Well, we're real excited to meet those 3 artists that have been selected
absolutely.
this year. It's going to be very, very cool. Let's go to our student groups.
Okay.
See, they've got questions for you about the art in general. Let's go first of all to Orange, Ohio. Orange, feel free to unmute your microphone, come in and say hello. Do you have a question right now for Tuan about contemporary art? Go right ahead.
Okay.
No questions at this time.
Great.
Don't worry, Orange. We're coming back to you and anticipating fabulous questions coming from you. Tuan, thanks so much for having us in this space.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to it.
Right,
I want you all to know as well that we're going to be back at the Contemporary Art Museum on April 30th when the exhibition that we're talking about actually opens. We'll have an opening night program right from here, and that will show live on the web, obviously near the St. Louis region. You'll be able to watch it on HCC TV channel 26 right here in St. Louis. But you'll be able to watch it on the web at hectv.org as well. So to students joining us interactively today or anybody who's watching today, I think it'd be kind of cool for you to return to us on April 30th to see what these artists have done and what it turns out like. They'll probably be interested in that as well, for all I know, to see what it actually ends up like. The first artist we're going to meet today is Martin Brief. And Martin, I'll invite you to come right on over and say hi to everybody.
Hey, Tim.
Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, let's start with a little biographical information. What's your art history? Where do you come from? Is it just something you picked up on the side, or have you wanted to be an artist since you were 5?
Well, I think I really got interested in art in high school. And I started taking some courses in high school. And then once I was off to college, I remember that I went to some kind of orientation. I was in a big auditorium, and they said, if you're interested in biology, go over there, and if you're interested in something else, go over here. And in the end, there were about 10 of us left in the middle. And someone came up to me and said, well, what have you done in high school? And I said, well, I've taken some art classes. And they said, all right, major in art. And then that was kind of how I ended up going forward as an artist.
And do you make a living out of art, or are you also doing other things on the side?
I teach art at St. Louis University, and then make some of my own artwork as well.
Well, we wanted to give the students a chance to learn what it is, the kind of work you do. And kids, as we begin to look at some images of previous work that Martin has done, we'll talk about it. And I want you all to be thinking about what questions do you have about what might have inspired him to do this kind of work, what are the tools he might use for this kind of work, and then later we'll also see some B-roll from his studio of work that he's actually doing for this particular exhibition. So we'll be able to see those images as they come up, Martin. But talk a little bit about the kind of work you do. It's textual. It's like... If the students would notice it, it's like, okay, it's a painting with a whole bunch of words. Is that an accurate or inaccurate description? How would you describe what you do?
Well, first, it's an ink drawing. So it's all hand-drawn with a very fine tip pen. And yes, sometimes I use words as the form of the work. And other times I'm using the words from some existing source of information as sort of the armature for the drawing.
Well, like if we look at this particular image here, and the students may not be able to read what's actually in it, what does this image represent? What's in here? What's
those are names, and they're taken from Art Forum magazine. And so I did this series making a single drawing for each issue of the magazine over the course of a year. And so what I did was I went through the magazine and I pulled out every single name in the magazine and then rewrote it into a square in the shape of the magazine. It's a square magazine.
Well, that was one of the things I was going to ask you. Does the shape, does the form that the text is on the paper, so to speak, is that symbolic or indicative of where you've gotten the idea from? Like it was deliberate that it would be in the shape of a magazine because it's from Art Forum magazine?
Right.
And something might end up being in a triangular shape or who knows what based on
it's possible,
where it's coming from?
But yeah, I like to let the source of the information help inform the visuals.
Oh, and here we see a really good close-up image of that where the students will be able to see the various names of the work. Well, I want student questions to start becoming involved in the process here. So let's go to Orange, Ohio. Orange, as you look at this work and you hear Martin talk about text and what he does and the use of ink, what question do you have right now? Go right ahead, Orange.
I have a question about throughout your work, like in the dictionary series and the newspaper series, you use time as a apparent theme throughout your work. Why do you use that?
That's when you say time, what are you referring to?
Because like what you said in your dictionary series, you did the dictionary series, and it related to the time of when you were born.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, with the newspaper series, I'll start there. With the newspaper series...
And give a little description of what it is, because obviously he's had the opportunity to learn about it in advance. So
okay, sure. So the newspaper series is a series of drawings based on the front page of the New York Times, in which I lay a sheet of translucent paper over the top of it, and then I fill in the letter O in all of the text. So you get this pattern. Oh, you can see it there now. Partly the time aspect, which is I draw from front pages that randomly selected from the day I was born to the present. And that really mostly gave it a context. I needed some way to bring in some parameters, because otherwise, there's a lot of time involved. And so
there's a lot of New York Times
helped.
front pages.
Yeah. And also, I felt like it was important for me to address a time period that I had a personal connection to. The dictionary, it just so happened that when I started that project, somebody gave me a dictionary that happened to be published from the year I was born. And so I like that connection because that's the language that I was born into.
Very cool. Orange, Ohio, thanks for that question. We'll come back to you guys. Let's go to Edmonton. Do you guys have a question right now for Mr. Brief?
Why did you pick the letter O in that?
Why the letter O?
Why the letter O? Okay.
I'll have you guys mute again.
I started the process of that project trying every letter that had a closed-in shape, and it just became a real jumble. And so when I did just the O's, the pattern was a lot cleaner and clearer. And I think also the O, the shape of the circle, references a lot of things that I thought were interesting, and they look a lot like some kind of readout that could be read, and I like that connection to the text.
What led you to this kind of work? This is really precise. As I look at it, it's like really precise. This is, I realize that all art is time consuming, but it's like, golly, it's defined, it's very specific. Do I need to read in something psychologically that this means you're a really precise person who's always organized and together, or is it the opposite of that, or just what led you to this kind of work?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I could say if it's like some psychological thing or not, but it's, I think, partly it's just something I gravitate to, that I guess I just have that in me to some degree. But I think also it's just, and this probably could apply to a lot of artists, you just gravitate to something and you don't always know why exactly. But when you get there, you're there and you know that it works for you.
Well, let's start to talk about what you're creating now for this exhibition. We've got B-roll that we're going to run of your studio, so people will see your workspace, and we can talk about that and what you've decided to create here. So we got a close-up of this work right here.
This is the project for the upcoming exhibition, and it's essentially, I'm working with the titles of books that I gathered from Amazon.com. I did a search for the term God, and you get a lot of book titles when you search for God. So I'm using all those titles as part of the drawings, or as the source for the drawings.
And your studio space is just part of your home environment there. What's the kind of paper that you work with?
I'm using Arches watercolor paper. It's kind of a heavier weight, has a little bit of a texture to it.
And as we look at some of these specific examples, talk about your tool. Talk about the nature of that fine pen you're working with. Is it just like a flare I can pick up at the local Walgreens or CVS pharmacy, or what is it? It's
a Rapidograph technical pen, and they come in different point sizes down to super small tip. But it's just India ink, basically, black ink, and Yeah, that's it.
Those dots that we were seeing there, and is that a pattern thing again, like we were talking about with the previous work?
Yeah, that's from the newspaper project, and yeah, so I think in all of my work, what comes out is the pattern that gets created from this information, and I think that pattern sort of reveals an underlying structure to information, and also then creates its own kind of information.
We've got an image of the pen close up so people can see the nib of the pen. And I saw you working with those white gloves, and obviously you want the paper. When I look at your work, I think the paper's very clean. Yeah. It's very crisp. It's just the ink on the paper. Right. So what do you do to avoid smudges? If you make, heaven forbid, you make a mistake, can you erase from there, and how do you scrape a little bit? How does that work out?
You want all the secrets?
Well, let's get deep into the behind the scenes.
Yeah, I try very hard not to make mistakes, but when you're dealing with that much text, it's inevitable. And so, yeah, the paper has multiple layers. You know, the fibers are built up, so you can remove a little bit of the surface and not have it be too noticeable. And so I'm able to lift off some of the ink and then rewrite on top of that.
Okay, cool. Orange, Ohio, do you guys have another question for Mr. Brief? Go right ahead.
What inspired you to do your dictionary series?
That's a great question. I think largely it was my interest in language and how language functions, and that we're so dependent on this system for all of our thoughts, all of our experiences get filtered through this, this system of language, that I felt like it was really important to explore that. And so I wanted to use the dictionary as the source, and as I started to work with it, I realized that it would be interesting to be able to have the structure of the dictionary, but then not have any of the text. So you'd still have this area defined that sort of is the shape of the meanings without the meanings themselves. So it's a kind of a combination of defined space, but all the definitions are removed.
Very cool. Edmonton, Alberta, let's go to you guys for a question.
Do you just do ink stuff, or do you paint or do anything else?
Most recently, just ink. Yeah, ink on paper.
Very cool. And I saw a third group that had joined us who was looking like they were sitting in a library. And guys, why don't you just unmute your microphone, come in and say hello and let me know who it is. And if you've got a question right now for Mr. Brief, go right ahead and ask it.
This is Bull Central High School in Kentucky, and we do have a question. For the rearrangement series, did you actually use two photographs and rearrange them to make a separate photograph, or did you come up with the other picture just out of your head?
No, that was, two photographs that I had made, and then I start with one and then rearrange the pixels to create the other image.
Very cool. Great specific question, Bullet, and I really appreciate the fact that the student groups are obviously familiar with the artist's work.
Right.
You've looked at that in advance with the materials we sent you. That's great. If you guys end up having more questions for Mr. Brief, because obviously our time with him is brief today, you're probably waiting for me to use that bad pun somewhere in the program. Yeah, I would have the same reaction if I was listening to it as well. You can email us questions, don't forget, to live@hectv.org, and we'll be happy to share those with Martin, because we'll have time between our two programs today to potentially get those answers to you and send them back via email. So send them to us at live@hectv.org. As we end our time with you today, Martin, you hang the things, they'll be hanging on the wall. Is there anything specific you're interested in audiences thinking about as they view your work, or you just want them to come with a blank slate, so to speak, and just see how they react to it? Any thought process from that regard?
Generally, I prefer people coming with a blank slate, being open-minded and understanding that art is something to be thought about and considered on your own terms.
Very cool. And speaking of email questions, we've just had one come into my ear. This is the part I love, when people talk into my head, and it isn't strange voices. The question is, were you inspired by Jewish microcalligraphy?
Wow.
Or are you familiar with what that is?
I'm not
'Cause I'm
really
not.
familiar with that, no. So, but it sounds like something I should investigate. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks for that email question. Don't forget it's live@hectv.org. Martin, thanks so very much
Thank
for
you.
being with us today.
All
We look
right.
forward to our afternoon program too.
Thanks.
So there you have a little bit of information about Martin Brief and his work, and don't forget you'll be able to see the finished work when we're here at the gallery exhibition opening on April 30th. That'll be a nighttime program which we'll be able to see live on the web. And if you've got more questions for Martin, then email them to us at live@hectv.org. We're going to switch gears now and go to an artist who's working with a very different kind of exhibition, a different medium for her pieces that she's creating for this Great Rivers Biennial, and that's Sarah Frost. Sarah, come on over and join us. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's start with just a little bit of information about you, the same way we did with Martin. So how did you come into the world of art, and what is it you're after as an artist? What excites you about doing it?
Well, let's see. I don't have such a funny story. I guess I was always interested in art. Certainly by junior high school I was, but really I was interested in a lot of things. I guess in high school, though, I decided I wanted to pursue art. And when I graduated college with a degree in painting, and the only thing I could do to make a living was paint scenery at local theaters. And I discovered that I loved creating environments as opposed to working on flat canvases. There's a theater here in St. Louis that's the largest outdoor theater in the country. It's called the Muni, and some of the sets we paint are about maybe 125 feet long by about 25 feet tall. And I discovered that I loved working in that sort of, well, it's a team effort on a huge scale. So that was a real paradigm shift for me, from working small to huge.
Well, we've got some images of previous work you've done, and we can talk about that scale and talk about that environment a little bit. Let's see if we can bring up some of those images of Sarah's work previously, and students begin to think about the questions you want to ask Sarah about the kind of work she's done as you look at these images, and we talk a little bit about that idea of creating an environment. So we'll bring up the first one now. And Sarah, talk about this particular piece and just how it reflects what you were talking about wanting to work in an environment or create an environment.
Well, I guess I should take one step back, since this is 3D work. At some point several years ago, I was fortunate enough to do some traveling, and I was actually traveling in Eastern Europe, particularly in Berlin, and I realized in looking at buildings that still have divots from shotgun shells and cannonballs from World War II, that there was so much history in those materials themselves. Maybe that seems obvious, but I just felt this weight of history, and I actually saw a colonnade where there were all these shotgun divots out of the colonnade and all these patches that had put in, and I could imagine a body stepping behind the columns in gun battle. And that was a very pivotal experience. My work shifted from 2D painting to 3D, and I started working with found objects to sort of play on that idea that the object itself has a history that gives it meaning, as opposed to creating a representation or a picture to generate meaning. So these two pieces, one is probably about 60,000 keys that I removed from old discarded computer keyboards. Some of them were from stock brokerage firms, many from individuals. Some were fire damage, some had nail polish. It was just sort of interesting just what all those keys suggested about those who use them. And then the other piece in that picture was just a whole bunch of white and off-white objects collected from yard sales, household objects.
Very cool. So and here we see a close-up of the keyboard pieces. So it is something, it's not just about the creation of what the piece finally ends up looking like. The material really matters to you in terms of the fact of where it's been, what its history is, and how people might have interacted with it in the past. Is that part of what then becomes important to the finished work for you?
That's very much, and in that last image with the red keys around the fire alarm, I like to think about space. That's maybe where the theater influence comes in. As opposed to just making a piece on a wall, I like the idea of the viewer anticipating. Like in that particular gallery, I think people could see that texture several rooms away, but they had no idea what it was. And it wasn't until they got in that little space that they got the surprise of what the material is. And then I think the piece changed as they moved through the space, and I tried to relate my work to the elements that were there, such as the fire alarm. It was a crazy little gallery. There were also heat vents and a door to the basement and wire mold, and
So the fire alarm was part of the gallery space. You haven't placed it in the work. The work's gone around the fire alarm.
Right, the work went all around all these crazy objects that were built into the walls of the gallery space.
Dare I ask you how long it took to glue those things up there?
A long time. For some reason, well, scale is very important to my work. I like to have repetition of units, and no two individual units are identical because of their use. But I like the sort of, the cohesiveness of many repeated units. But it has to create a certain scale to be compelling and to relate to the size of a human body walking through the space. So unfortunately for me, that inevitably means lots and lots and lots of whatever it is that I'm working with.
And we're going to see that when we look at the piece you're creating for here as well. But let's go to some student questions. Orange, Ohio, a question you have for Ms. Frost? Go right ahead.
What artists are you influenced by?
That's a great question. There's so many artists. One artist that I discovered when I was in college was Leonardo Drew, who also was a painter, and he started shredding his paintings, and through the process of recycling his paintings into 3D work, became a 3D artist. So he's somebody I could relate to. Richard Serra is another person who does very different work, large-scale steel sculpture, but he also thinks about how the piece relates to your body and your body moving through the space the piece creates. Tara Donovan is an artist. Those are a few off the top of my head.
Cool, thanks for that. Good question. Bullitt Central in Kentucky, you guys have a question?
Yeah. How did your fine arts degree assist you in your theater work?
Well, that's an interesting question. I just sort of stumbled into theater, so I guess that a really solid background in drawing. Where I went to college, drawing and figure drawing and perspective, all those fundamentals were very strongly stressed. And it's good to have a handle on that in theater because, for example, at the main theater I work at, the productions happen every week, which is incredibly fast. And frequently we'll get a rendering from the designer that doesn't fit exactly the size of the flats that are being built. Or there will be errors in the rendering, like 8 different perspective points, that when you blow up a little rendering like this to, say, 25 by 125, the fact that you have 8 different perspective points becomes a problem. So having those good fundamental drawing skills allows you to think on your feet and fix the perspective on the fly.
Let's talk a little bit about the piece that's going to go here. We've got B-roll from your studio, so students can see that and can see what you're creating for this space, and then we'll also have a chance to kind of go into the space that you're going to utilize. So as we begin to look at the B-roll here, your studio space is in a garage, is that right?
Right, a garage behind the house.
And start talking a little bit as we walk and talk. We'll move stairs so we go down to that space. Start talking a little bit about where the idea for this exhibition piece came from as the students begin to see some images of it here.
Well, I like to do things that relate to the current moment, and I accidentally actually discovered on YouTube a video of a boy who looked to me like he was about 8, and he had a high squeaky voice. It was a tutorial how to make either a long rifle or a sniper rifle, and I was just amazed at his ingenuity in making the gun. So I started looking at other videos, and I discovered that there are I don't know how many, there are probably hundreds, and I was also amazed at the number of hits those videos got. Some of them just a few hundred, and some of them up to 600,000.
Wow. So speaking of, you had mentioned scale before and the repetition, and we saw it obviously in the pieces that came from the keyboard. So obviously for what's going to happen with this particular exhibition is you've got a lot of guns that you've created. That repetition, that amount of them really matters to what you're trying to create here?
Right, I've probably got about 75 different kinds of guns, and then I'm making multiples of each. And many times the boys made a kit, you know, like several different scopes and chargers and handles and silencers. And so with the repeated guns, I can outfit them differently, the same gun style.
And as the students look at that video, is it just regular like cardstock paper? Is it like regular typing paper? What are you making them out of?
Well, I've got 3 different weights paper. Structurally, sometimes I need to use a heavier paper and sometimes a lighter paper. So paper, I did a lot of experimenting with paper when I was starting.
And we noticed that you had a model of the space there. Do you utilize that in every place that you work, or is that specific, like, because since you're designing site-specific spaces, do you like to create a model of what the space is?
I frequently do, especially because, you know, this space is so large. A model, I think, is critical to planning out the space. That smaller room with the computer keys, I just made a whole lot of trips over to that space, but it was only 8 by 6 by 10, so I didn't make a model of that.
And as you can tell, students, we've moved now into the space that was below us before, which is part of the exhibition space for the Contemporary Museum. And it's not necessarily this particular space where all of your work will be exhibited, but it gives us a chance to get a sense of, in a big space like this, how that work's going to be implemented. So talk a little bit with the students about that. Things will be hung from the ceiling?
Right. All the guns will be hung with monofilament line, a thin line, in sort of a network from the ceiling, and they will probably vary in heights. The floor level will all be bipods and tripods and guns with stands that will be sitting on the ground. So it'll sort of be a very open wall of guns. And much of my work is very compacted, like the 2 images you saw, but the negative space, the air around the shapes the guns make, is so critical to just how formally strong and interesting the guns are that I decided I needed to hang them so that you could see all those shapes. And if I compacted them together, you missed out on how wonderful each one of those forms really was.
So you want me to walk in and amongst them, like I can walk, like as they're sitting here on the floor, so to speak, I can walk around and amongst them? I'll be invited to do that, or do you want me to stand a bit back and look at it?
I think it will sort of be like a curtain, so there will be a corridor. I'll sort of direct you through the curtain. I'm still working that out because I'm still working out the exact form of the guns, but I think I will direct the viewer through the space, but it certainly is something very interactive where you can get right up there. It's not like you've got to stand back here.
Very cool. Let's go to student questions. Students, now that you've seen that work, let's see what questions you have about it. Orange, Ohio, we'll go to you.
If anybody has a question, we'll unmute, okay?
Okay, that's no problem, Orange. We'll come back to you again. Edmonton, Alberta, do you guys have a question at this time for Ms. Frost?
Did you make paper bullets for the guns?
Oh, did you make paper bullets for the guns as well?
Well, most of the boys in the videos made little cone-shaped darts, and almost all of the guns shoot, which is pretty amazing. So I probably will make some darts. And one thing I wanted to point out is that this is found form. It's analogous to the found objects. It's just found form that I actually found in a digital arena that I am creating. So I'm trying to be faithful. I'm following the tutorials and following the guns and representing them here in the context of an art museum.
Cool. Let's go back to Bullet Central again in Kentucky. A question from you.
Are there any other objects that you've made with paper other than guns that you've thought about making?
Other objects you've made with paper besides guns?
I did have a piece several years ago that I made out of translucent paper that was folded varieties of takeout boxes. And I also handmade paper and made several hundred pairs of Levi's jeans that I cast out of paper that were translucent and very frail looking. So I have done a few paper projects. I actually love paper. It's the most simple material, but I love it.
And it's my understanding that El Paso has joined us now. El Paso, if so, feel free to come in, unmute your microphone. And do you guys have a question right now for Ms. Frost about her work?
Yes? Okay.
By making the guns out of paper, did you get to learn the functions of the gun? For example, can you learn how to lock and load?
Well, I didn't know anything about guns at all actually before, and it's sort of amazing how much I've learned from these boys. And in the videos, the person who made the video always shows how everything works, like the pump shotgun pumps and the 5-barrel revolver, you know, it has an arm that comes out and you can spin the barrels to put the bullets in. So I've learned quite a bit actually.
Very cool. Fort Wayne, Indiana, I think you guys are going to join us at 10:30. Do you have a question right now for Ms. Frost? Go right ahead.
Hello, we don't have any questions at this time.
No worry, Fort Wayne, we'll come back to you. As obviously these YouTube videos inspired you. It's where part of your idea came from. Will the audience coming into the Contemporary know about the YouTube video itself? Would that be something you'll put in text, or will there be those videos playing as part of the piece too, or is that important to you? What do you think?
Well, the fact that this is found form is very important. It will be in the text, but I'm also thinking on a separate wall outside of the physical space of having screen grabs to show you know, the videos many of the guns came from. And I haven't quite decided about having a video yet. I'm still thinking about that.
And you're still working on this piece, obviously. Is it possible, I'll ask you the same horrible question I asked Martin, is it possible to categorize the amount of hours that's gone into this creation so far?
It's pretty tough. It's a lot of hours.
Well, don't forget that on April 30th, you can join us live from the Contemporary for our program in the evening via the web, and you can see Sarah's work and have the chance to see what it finally comes out to look like. Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much
for being with us. It's a real pleasure.
Thanks.
I'm going to move back upstairs, and as I do that, we're going to show you some images of our third artist's work he's done in the past, and that's Cameron Fuller, who's going to be joining to talk about it, the installation work that he's doing. So I'll let you guys look at those pictures now, and you're going to notice the use of color that Cameron's involved with. You're going to notice the scale, the size that he's working with, and think about the room that I was just located in and how that room might be conducive or difficult to create an actual installation in, and how you might think about how your installation then would be reacted to by people as they walk around that environment, or how they might be able to move in and out of that installation as they walk around that environment. So those are examples of some of the previous work that he's done, and what we're going to have the opportunity today to talk about Cameron with, as we've done our other artists, is just where he comes from and what he's interested in and how he created the exhibition here. So I'm looking forward to meeting Cameron, and I'm walking around this corner here, and I love getting my exercise today at the Contemporary Art Museum. And Cameron, thanks so much for being here. Real pleasure. Well, we'll start with the same question with you that we did the other two. What's the background information we want to know about you, and how did you come to what you do?
You know, I guess I've drawn my entire life and dabbled in art. I had an uncle who was a painter and an aunt who had an art gallery when I was a kid, so I guess I was always kind of around it and seeing contemporary artwork, I guess. But it was something that I actually came to very late in life. I did a lot of other stuff and came back to school. I guess in my mid-20s, actually not study art, and found myself in the art studio taking an elective class and was just in there all the time, kind of supplementing the things I was doing on my own. So I guess I always had kind of a studio at home, something in a garage or something that I would make things, but I guess it just really captivated me at that time, and I was actually studying anthropology, and I thought, well, a PhD in anthropology, a master's degree in art, neither one is terribly practical, so why not go where I'm drawn? So I guess I ended up in the art studio and working there.
And a lot of what we saw in those images, previous work, they're rather large scale. Are they created with the space in mind that they're going to be shown in, or how do you approach it? Is it an idea and then I'm going to make it fit the space, or what?
You know, oftentimes, I mean, it's just a really simple sketch, and most of the pieces that you saw previously are actually things that are done not only for the space, but on site. I mean, most of that work, I would spend a week or so in the space, actually drawing on the walls or building things into the space. So yeah, those are very much tailored specifically to the kind of architecture, and I guess a lot of what I'm interested in is, you know, can you take small spaces or strange shaped spaces or something that is maybe a difficulty if you were hanging paintings or something, and almost force the architecture to become non-existent, to take the corners and push them back into the wall, and to kind of make it feel very much like the walls don't necessarily exist as a physical limitation to the space, but to kind of push the images out into the space that doesn't exist, I guess.
And I know in a lot of your work you like incorporating animals into the piece, the concept of nature. We've got an image of an example of that. Why important? What intrigues you about that?
I guess a lot of my work, I guess I would think, revolves around storytelling and the idea of fables and I don't know, all the kind of fantastical stories you hear as a kid, and I think that there's an underlying social commentary to those things where I think they speak a lot about how humans interact and all these other sorts of things. So I guess I'm just interested in fairy tales and fables, and there's something about those characters. The animals are really stand-ins for humans, and they represent certain aspects of our personalities and what have you. So I think it's just interesting to use those as an effort to assist in telling stories, I guess.
And we've got a mask that you've created here, which I'm holding in my hand, that hopefully people will be able to see very nicely, which reminds me very much of a wolf or some sort of creature like that.
Yeah,
is this part of what you're working with for the exhibition that's going to be here?
It is, and actually, I guess I'm making a whole series of these kind of, I guess, artifacts in a way. I mean, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. These are modeled after Northwest Coast Native American art, and I guess I grew up seeing a lot of this kind of imagery and was captivated by it as a kid. And now I guess I'm kind of going back and basing these objects on my recollections of that and my kind of interest in that as a kid. And again, as an adult, it's interesting you start studying the culture and the way that art plays a role in that particular culture and how people interact with it on a kind of everyday basis, and is interesting to me as a kind of secondary note, I guess. So these are really kind of artifacts, I guess, somehow.
Very cool. Let's go to some student questions to see what they have about your previous work, and then we'll talk about what you're doing specifically for this exhibition. Orange, Ohio, we'll go to you guys again. A question for Mr. Fuller?
Why do you feel that your art should be temporary? Like, you put all your time into this work, and then it's just scotch tape and you take it out.
I guess it's an interesting question. I guess part of it is logistical. I mean, as an artist, if I make gigantic things all the time, then I have to find a place to put them when I'm done. And most of this work is really huge, and I don't expect that someone would buy it. It's also site specific, so it would be difficult to transport and install someplace else. So I guess most of it has to do with the fact that I'm really just trying to provide an experience. It's not so much about creating things that are permanent, but it's much more about people coming in and participating and kind of bringing to the work whatever their personal experience kind of draws out of them when they encounter these things.
So you're not interested most of the time in making pieces that would individually be bought by a consumer?
I still do drawings. I mean, I make a lot of drawings. I mean, I guess my undergraduate work was in printmaking, so I still make prints occasionally. I still do a lot of drawing. I really love working on paper as well. Okay. So, but yeah, I mean, throughout the program today. It does kind of. So. I guess I still feel a connection to that, and I guess those things are saleable objects, but for the most part, I guess I'm much more interested in the idea of, like I said, kind of creating an environment, allowing people to come in and have a kind of an experience that gives them a story to tell or draws something out of their head to kind of create a story.
Cool. Let's go back to Edmonton, Alberta. A question for Mr. Fuller?
We have a question. When you're working around with your art, like you said, you like to enjoy animals and fantasy. What was your favorite animal?
Do you have a favorite animal that you like to work with most?
I mean, there's a kind of a short list that goes into what animals I use. I mean, again, I grew up in the Northwest, so to me, I always think of kind of woodland creatures. It tends to be wolves and bears and deer and foxes and those sorts of things. So I guess, and birds too, but I guess that would be the kind of short list of animals. Those are also, I guess, wolves and foxes. I mean, Sly is a fox, and everyone has the kind of Little Red Riding Hood image of a wolf in their head. Deer, I'm just suspicious of for some reason. There's something about an animal that doesn't make any noise that you wonder what's going on in their head. So yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, the list of my short list of favorite animals.
Kentucky, a question from you guys.
Seeing as how the majority of your work is done in 3 dimensions, have you ever considered working in theater or film scenery?
You know, in all honesty, part of where some of this in the working with kind of environments comes from, oddly enough, similar to Sarah, I too have done theater and set things. I actually just this last year kind of designed the first set that I had designed and constructed and did the whole thing myself. But I started out as an undergrad in college doing it for money, building sets here and there. And there's something really striking to me, not necessarily about what happens on it once it's constructed and it's done, but about the feeling you get on an empty set. That it's a place where an action's supposed to take place, or it's a place that it's like a container for a story, that you walk into it and you know that there's a kind of situation that arises in this place, and it's something that then you're forced to project into it what you assume happens or what you think the story would be. So theater and sets are interesting to me, but somehow much more interesting when there's no one there.
Interesting. That is interesting. El Paso, Texas, a question from you guys?
Like, given his archaeology, like his educational background, do you find that very heavily on your work as an influence?
I guess all of the things that you do are what makes the art interesting. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot about, I guess about how cultures interact, or about how people interact. I mean, I guess I studied a lot of philosophy and studied the anthropology. I guess I think about how we categorize things, how we sort things out, how we kind of make sense of the world. And I think that that definitely comes from my experiences outside of art. So I would say that all of those things definitely play a part, and that's what kind of adds to the kind of richness of whatever you do, is all of your experiences outside of just looking at other art. So.
Very cool. Fort Wayne, I'm going to come to you guys in a moment. We're going to begin to talk about the work that specifically Mr. Fuller is doing for this exhibition, and you'll be able to ask a question about that or something else. Let's talk about your studio a little bit, and we look at B-roll for that. And we'll also talk about the work you're doing for this exhibition. We've got an email question talking about, if you're not selling works of art, then how do you make money from your work? Are you getting commissioned? Do you get commissions and paid by commission? How does that work?
You know, in all honesty, most of the time, there's not a lot of money in it. I mean, I occasionally sell a drawing or something, but I guess right now I expect that most of my living is kind of made doing other things. I teach part-time, I have other jobs, so yeah, I guess I do other things so that I can kind of support the habit of making art.
And as we look at this B-roll, Cameron and I are going to walk downstairs again to talk about how his pieces might fit into a space as well. And we're seeing previous work that you've done here where the students were able to also see a JPEG image of, and then they're seeing inside your studio space, and they're beginning to see a framework that you're building here. What's your idea behind what eventually will be here at the Contemporary?
I guess in the past that I've built things that I would consider much more kind of self-contained environments that are built into a space. For this show, I guess my idea was much more to use the idea of the museum a little bit and to kind of present a museum within a museum. So I think we're used to seeing things framed a certain way in museums, and so I guess what I'm doing is building dioramas and vitrines and things that are, I guess, kind of traditional museum presentations, but in an effort to kind of frame the way that I would normally make an installation. So for instance, the piece that you guys are seeing probably mostly in the studio there is the framework for this kind of self-contained environment that can be disassembled and reassembled to, pardon me, to kind of be mobile. So it's actually kind of a little mobile world that's contained within the kind of formal tradition of dioramas like you would see at the Field Museum or the Museum of Natural History or something.
And I can't missed the opportunity to, you'd mentioned deers, and we saw that there's a deer in your studio. Yeah. Is that deer going to be part of a piece that you're working on for here? Is that an inspirational thing to overcome your fear of deer?
No, I think, again, I mean, the drawings tend to kind of focus around fables and fairy tales and these animals and kind of presenting their personalities. And so I guess this is an instance where normally the installations are vacant of characters, and I'm actually with the dioramas, because you're actually shut out of them, the viewer can't actually go inside of them. The idea was then to populate it with characters, or to populate it with those little pieces of the story, and so I'm actually using taxidermy now to kind of do that. So the idea too, I think, is to relate some level of strangeness with something that's familiar. So to kind of create this world that's a fantastical place that exists outside of reality, but then to allow the viewer a little bit of a segue into it by giving you something familiar, by presenting you with things that you know and things that are you know, familiar to us in our real life, I guess.
And this model I'm holding is a model of a potential how a diorama might work for the space you're going to use here?
This was really the kind of initial model for the diorama that actually the framework is what's in the studio right now. So the scale has changed a bit and what have you. I tend to make these quickly just to give myself a little bit of something to stare at and think about how it's going to be constructed. I guess I find more and more the larger things get, the more your engineering skills are tested, because it has to somehow go through a doorway and come apart. So the diorama is actually about 10 by 15 foot, the footprint of it, and it's about 10 feet high, and I have a 32-inch doorway in my studio that everything has to go out. So it's a bit of a task to unbolt things and take them apart and figure out how to fit them together. So
very cool. Let's go to questions. Fort Wayne, I'll start with you guys. Fort Wayne, a question?
Yes, we do. Hang on.
About how long does it take to make a full diorama?
About how long did it take to produce? And I'll have you guys mute your microphone again, Fort Wayne. How long did it take to create the diorama and then the work you're doing to make it come to life?
Well, you know, the diorama is actually still in process. I have no idea how long it will actually take. A long time. I mean, it's probably a good month in the planning of trying to figure out at least how the pieces are going to fit together. And then, I don't know, to build the framework and to kind of get things roughed out is probably a month's worth of work. And then, you know, there's a lot of painting and fine tuning and silk flowers and all sorts of fun stuff.
Cool.
All the glitter and bells and whistles that come afterwards.
That's a nice thought. Orange, Ohio, a question from you for Mr. Fuller?
We had a hard time hearing your initial explanation about your artwork because there were some muting issues, but we enjoyed the idea about the strange versus the familiar in your art. And also, we wanted to know who helps you construct this? Do you do this all independently, or do you have a team of helpers?
I guess the answer to the team of helpers thing is no. Generally speaking, I build this stuff on my own. A lot of the things that I make are big enough that I end up having to call in extra hands to lift things and move stuff around once in a while. But I guess part of the issue is that I don't do a lot of designing of things very well beforehand. So a lot of it is a bit of improvisation, that I have an idea and I kind of work to see how it goes together. But I guess it's difficult for me because I don't have an engineering or architecture background to understand how these things are going to go together until I actually physically kind of get my hands dirty. So most of it's done on my own.
Very cool. I want to invite people, don't forget to send us email questions. If you have more questions that you've thought about, send them to us at live@hectv.org and we'll have the artists respond to them via email for you. Let's go to Kentucky. Bullitt Central, do you guys have a question right now for Mr. Fuller?
Yes. What is the largest scale project you've ever done?
Well, I guess this one will probably end up being the largest scale project I've ever done. Previously, actually I just worked as a visiting artist in Kentucky. I was collaborating with my girlfriend Sarah Paulson, who's also an artist, and we actually did a project with students. It was probably a 70 by 80 foot gallery, and pretty much covered everything. So that's probably about as big as it gets. I mean, normally things, I don't know, can be upwards of 20 feet high and 30 feet wide or something.
And you were talking about this piece being about 10 by 15 by 10?
Right, I guess like this particular piece, this is actually just one piece. I think square footage wise, I mean, the actual kind of floor print of the thing will be much bigger. These pieces are actually going to be smaller in scale. They'll just be kind of combined to create little rooms, I guess.
Edmonton, do you guys have a final question for Mr. Fuller?
What fairy tale has inspired you the most to do your art?
You know, I don't know if there's one that's inspired me the most. I would say the most recent, I did a lot of work with it's actually a Grimm's fairy tale called The Willow Wren and the Bear, which isn't necessarily a hugely popular one, but it's essentially the story of a war that happens between the animals of the air and the animals of the land that starts because of an insult. The bear insults the goopiness of the bird's nest. So.
Thank you very much for those questions. Cameron, thank you very much for being here. I want to invite Sarah and Martin to join us as well as we think about just ending the program here. As you, Cameron, would have the opportunity to talk to these kids about who are interested in art themselves, any advice, any words of inspiration as they think about being artists themselves? What should they be true to? What should they be thinking?
I mean, I think you just have to do what you really enjoy. I mean, the beauty of contemporary art is I don't think there is like one direction everything is going. So, I mean, if you find a little doodle that you find fascinating, there's no reason that can't become something much bigger. So just continue to do what you really enjoy.
Sarah, thought from you on that?
I thought that was a great answer.
Sarah says ditto, and Martin?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think the other thing is that, you know, to maintain life as an artist, you really have to have some determination and stick to itness.
Well, you guys obviously have that with the work that you're creating. Thank you very, very much for being here. Our thanks to the Contemporary Art Museum of St. Louis for allowing us to make this happen. Don't forget that on April 30th, you'll be able to join us live from the exhibition as we celebrate opening night on April 30th, and you'll be able to see these people's work in its finished form. On March 19th, we'll be coming to you from the Hunt Gallery at Webster University for a program about their exhibition of contemporary Indian art. So we'll see different kinds of pieces, and we'll have the opportunity to meet an artist from India who'll be exhibited for that program. Don't forget that you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and we look forward to your tweets or your Facebook emails to us. And don't forget, if you've got further questions for any of the artists, you can send them to us at live@hectv.org. Thanks for joining us for the Making of Contemporary Art here from the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis. Bye, everybody. Have an excellent day.